Over the years, we have dealt with every aspect of alleged virus existence, whether it has been isolation, genomics, proteomics, antibodies, imaging, PCR, epidemiology, clinical conditions, and vaccines, as well as animal and human experiments. However, it still leaves a question for some people, and that is, if viruses don't exist, then what exactly are antivirals? In effect, it is a variation of the question, if the virus doesn't exist, then how did they make the vaccine? Well, like the establishment's vaccine narrative, the antiviral narrative is also vitally important to them. And despite calling out vaccines, unfortunately, many so-called health freedom entities are still buying into the concept of antivirals. In this video, we expose the fallacies of a drug class that has nothing to do with improving your health, and everything to do with maintaining a phony model.
But we think it's really opening the door to the fact that we now have the capability of treating, and I can guarantee you, as more people, more companies, more investigators get involved, it's going to get better and better. Because what it is proven is that a drug can block this virus. And I'll give you an example in a moment of why we think, looking forward, this is very optimistic.
The Wikipedia entry for antiviral drug states that they are a class of medication used for treating viral infections. Those of you that know our work will appreciate that we take scientific definitions very seriously. For example, the term viral infections needs to be carefully analysed. In the present era, infection is taken to mean invasion by microbes. That is, healthy tissue being attacked by marauding germs, which leads to a state of disease. However, the original meaning of infect derived from the Latin inficere, which simply meant to corrupt, stain, or spoil. This is consistent with the terrain paradigm, where healthy tissue is compromised by trauma, poisoning, and other forms of devitalization. Only on that point do the ubiquitous microbes change their activity and increase in numbers to process the dead and dying tissue. Unfortunately, the promulgation of so-called germ theory from the late 1800s onwards led to the belief that it was the microbes themselves that were the disease-causing agents. The marketing was based on one disease, one microbe, and one apparent magic bullet, courtesy of your friendly pharmaceutical corporation. Not only that, it was claimed that an individual with disease could make other individuals sick simply through the transmission of the rogue microbe. These fantasies are all problematic in themselves, which is why we have produced hundreds of publications addressing the most famous diseases, and why, in every single case, microbes have not been shown to be their causes. So keeping all this in mind, we come back to Wikipedia's definition of an antiviral drug, and there is an additional issue. In this case, the pivotal problem with the term antiviral is the word viral. To have viral, there needs to be virus. And what does virus mean? In early 2020, I started publishing videos on YouTube, and almost immediately, the questions started coming in about the situation in Wuhan, China. There were rumours of a viral illness that was spreading around, apparently with the potential to turn into an epidemic or even a pandemic. The viewers asked me to investigate what was going on and whether there was anything to worry about. At that time, I was still a practicing doctor, but my husband Mark had left the medical system about 5 years earlier. He wanted nothing more to do with medicine, so I had to twist his arm a bit in order to turn his attention to researching virology. The rest, as they say, is history, because Mark soon became one of virology's most prominent critics and the chief researcher for all our related publications. One of the things he found most fascinating was answering the question, what does the word virus mean? Sometimes he would ask former doctor colleagues what the definition of the word meant to them, and it was apparent that they didn't really know. Then again, neither did we in those early days. And it subsequently became apparent that neither did the virologists, whose own textbooks do not always include the most fundamental of scientific definitions.
I don't want to be your textbook, you know? I got other things to do.
Mark wrote that the concept and meaning of virus have been through a number of iterations over several hundred years. The appearance of the word in the English language in the 14th century derived from the Latin virus, meaning poison, sap of plants, slimy liquid, a potent juice. It is said that the reference to an agent that causes infectious disease had emerged by the 1790s, and the modern scientific use commenced in the 1880s. From the first purported discovery of a virus, there has been no consistent definition of what a virus is, because, unlike other empirical biological sciences, there has never been a tangible viral particle that could be naturally observed, described, isolated, characterized and tested for pathogenicity. Hence, without a tangible asset for virologists to engage with, the term virus has taken on a protean quality, shimmying its way from one pret-a-porter definition to the next in order to keep up with the latest viral theory. For more on the definitional issues regarding so-called viruses, you can read Mark's full paper, Virus, Bacteriophage and Single Virus Genomics, or watch my video version of the same. In essence, when it comes to viruses, the concept of alleged pathogenicity goes beyond misinterpretation issues to, well, existential issues. It is certainly easier to understand the concept of other antimicrobials in the form of, say, antibiotics, because bacteria do exist and can be studied in scientific experiments. Antibiotics are medications that either kill microbes or stop them reproducing. You can put such drugs on a petri dish to see that the bacterial colonies are clearly inhibited. All very interesting, but the same effect can be achieved with ethanol. For example, dropping a Bailey's Comet on the petri dish might do the trick. However, according to Healthline, it won't work if you imbibe ethanol because when you drink, the concentration of alcohol that actually enters your bloodstream isn't enough to effectively kill germs. While I'm being satirical here, for us it is now a somewhat strange idea that anyone would want to kill bacteria that are part of their living ecosystem. For more in-depth coverage of this topic, you can watch my video, The Truth About Antibiotics, to appreciate the lack of true effectiveness of this drug class and the mythology surrounding it. Despite the inappropriate use of antibiotics by mainstream medicine, I have never encountered the argument that antibiotics prove that bacteria exist. That's because bacteria were discovered in nature and can be readily observed by anyone with a basic light microscope. It is straightforward to see that antibiotic compounds have no bearing on the upstream fact of bacterial existence. However, something curious happens when it comes to alleged antiviral medications. Many people seem to think that how can you have any antivirals if you don't have any viruses? How can you have any pudding if you don't eat yummy? In that case, Pink Floyd exposed a logical fallacy in their dig at authoritarianism, but at least both meat and pudding can be shown to exist. On the other hand, when it comes to, quote, antivirals, the compounds exist, but that has no bearing on whether viruses exist. Along the same lines, you can make an assertion that Tylenol is a potent anti-unicorn agent, but that does not mean that unicorns exist. Furthermore, asserting that unicorns are the cause of headaches and observing that the claimed anti-unicorn agent Tylenol relieves some headaches does not mean that unicorns have now been shown to exist. So, let's delve into the world of so-called antivirals to see why the same principles apply. The first ever, quote, antiviral to be used in humans was idoxuridine in 1962. It was said to be a treatment for keratitis or corneal inflammation caused by alleged herpes simplex infections. You have probably never heard of it because it was highly toxic and quickly withdrawn from human use. However, I believe that it is still given to cats and dogs in some locations. In any case, idoxuridine was largely replaced by the more famous drug acyclovir, originally marketed as Zovirax. Both of these drugs are classed as nucleoside analogues, which means they imitate naturally occurring nucleosides, that is, the building blocks of DNA and RNA. Now, we don't need to get bogged down in the biochemistry here. But the pharmaceutical empire informs us that acyclovir works by 1. Competitive inhibition of viral DNA polymerase, 2. Incorporation into and termination of the growing viral DNA chain, and 3. Inactivation of the viral DNA polymerase. In other words, by introducing the word viral, they are claiming that the drug specifically targets the production of viral DNA. But how could this be so? According to the virologists, viruses are obligate intracellular parasites that need to hijack a host's cellular machinery. That means that agents have to act against the host, such as a human's own cellular functions, not just the alleged virus. And this gets to the core issue. That is, so-called antivirals, such as acyclovir, are only anti-metabolic agents that interfere with normal cellular function. The virus remains a figment of the virologist's imaginations, and its existence is not required in this equation. In fact, it is the alleged host that is the real target of these drugs. And in case there was any doubt about the potential toxicity of this drug class, death is listed as the most serious adverse effect.
You should try our new prescription medication. Side effects include sneezing, wheezing, labored breathing, trouble speaking, sleeping, eating, hemorrhages, internal bleeding, feeling short of breath, nausea, dry mouth, cough and fever, blockages of the ureter, choking, bloating, tremor, seizures, coma, stroke, or death.
Perhaps it is not surprising to appreciate the parallels with another fraudulent class of medical intervention in the form of chemotherapy. Chemotherapeutics also interfere with DNA and cellular processes such as division. They have the potential to interfere with all cells, but the medico-pharma industry claim that cancer cells are effectively targeted because they are the fastest dividing ones. I'm not going to get into the cancer industry and its incorrect models regarding the causes of cancer in this presentation. Suffice to say here that, like antivirals, cancer drugs can be highly toxic, and death is certainly a common adverse effect. Furthermore, while reducing or stabilizing tumor mass can be an effective chemotherapy, this has nothing to do with addressing why the process came about in the first place. But what about antivirals? What alleged evidence has been presented for their effectiveness? I can be frank and tell you that while working as a doctor in the system, I did not observe any effectiveness at all in the clinical setting. One of the most common examples was the use of acyclovir cream for cold sores. Either the patient applied the cream and it resolved over 7 to 10 days, or they did nothing and it resolved over 7 to 10 days. However, laboratory virologists have made claims that their lab experiments show the effectiveness of antivirals, and thus, by inference, viruses must exist. For example, if we look up the quote, antiviral activities of acyclovir, we read that using plaque reduction assays, the IC50 against herpes simplex virus isolates ranges from 0.02 to 13.5 micrograms per ml for HSV1 and from 0.01 to 9.9 micrograms per ml for HSV2. The problem here is that the plaques are simply cytopathic effects that have been attributed to imagined viruses. There are numerous types of stressors that can cause cells to break down, and the virus model is not required. Adding a compound such as acyclovir to the mix does not mean viruses exist, no matter what effect it has on the cell culture. Coming back to the acyclovir cream I witnessed, at least that form was not known for extreme clinical toxicity, unlike another alleged antiviral azidothymidine or AZT. This drug was first synthesized in the 1960s with hopes that it would be a cancer chemotherapeutic. However, the toxicity was highly problematic, and any hopes for the project were bitterly shelved. But fast forward 2 decades into the mid-1980s, and the pharmaceutical corporation Burroughs Wellcome, today known as GlaxoSmithKline, pulled it out of the closet and claimed it was an antiviral agent effective against the newly invented HIV. The pharmaceutical empire largely relied on a fraudulent paper published in the New England Journal of Medicine in 1987. It wasn't just the conflict of interest involving Burroughs Wellcome funding the study, but the rampant cheating that went on to make it look like AZT was a lifesaver in AIDS patients. We outlined the overt scientific and pharmaceutical fraud in our book Virus Mania, particularly in Chapter 3 titled AIDS, From Spare Tire to Multi-Billion-Dollar Business. Keep in mind this was the beginning of the Anthony Fauci era. In 1988, the NBC reporter Perry Peltz was investigating the Burroughs Wellcome paper and said, "We repeatedly tried to interview Dr. Anthony Fauci at the National Institutes of Health, but both Dr. Fauci and Food and Drug Administration Commissioner Frank Young declined our request for interviews." It was somewhat surprising, given that AZT was being held up as a miracle drug. Interestingly, in April 2020, during COVID-19 mania, Dr. Fauci appeared alongside Operation Warp Speed chief Donald Trump to promote remdesivir stocks. During his pharmaceutical marketing efforts, he somewhat unexpectedly dropped AZT into the conversation.
So when I was looking at this data with our team the other night, it was reminiscent of 34 years ago in 1986 when we were struggling for drugs for HIV. And we had nothing. And there was a lot of anecdotal reports about things that maybe did work, maybe not. And people were taking different kinds of drugs. And we did the first randomized placebo-controlled trial with AZT, which turned out to give an effect that was modest.
You may have noticed that Dr. Fauci now classed the effects of AZT as, quote, modest, a major downgrade from the hype in the 1980s, when it was supposedly saving lives everywhere. But the virus show must go on, and by 2020, another toxic drug in the form of remdesivir was being promoted by the industry, a scandal we also exposed in Virus Mania. The so-called health freedom community has not escaped the fantasy world of alleged antivirals either. Unfortunately, many health practitioners who wake up to the fraud of vaccines continue to believe in viruses and seem to think they are engaged in a battle with them. During the COVID era, the synthetic drug ivermectin was promoted as a, quote, suppressed treatment for the imagined germ they called SARS-CoV-2 and the nonsensical diagnosis of COVID-19. You can watch my video, The Ivermectin Games, for a full account of how the narrative was introduced and the pseudoscience in the 2020 mainstream virology paper that suggested ivermectin was an antiviral. As my husband Mark would say, you didn't get sick because of a pharmaceutical deficiency. So don't go looking through the medicine cabinet for the cure. So-called antivirals add another twist to this issue because the viruses have not been shown to exist. As a caveat, we cannot rule out the possibility that in some circumstances the drugs might appear to be beneficial. For example, they may have anti-inflammatory effects, which could reduce symptoms in a person and make them feel better. An analogous effect is seen with some antibiotics that have anti-inflammatory actions outside of their bacteria-killing properties. In the world of allopathic medicine, this kind of suppression of bodily processes is seen as a treatment. It is an approach that buries disease even deeper, as it fails to address the underlying causes. The virus model is seductive because it falsely externalizes the real reasons that we become unwell and puts the blame elsewhere. It has also created a lucrative narrative for the medico-pharmaceutical industry to peddle fraudulent products such as vaccines and, quote, antivirals. The good news is that you can ignore the defective virus model and all of the toxic offerings that have been derived from it. If you are truly interested in achieving perfect health, then check out all of the free resources at drsambailey.com. There are hundreds of publications involving multiple aspects of health, and you can find them all by using the handy search function. You also have the option of subscribing to our regular Q&A sessions, where we share even more insights into how our family has achieved the highest levels of health through a natural lifestyle. If you enjoyed this video, please visit supportdrsam.com